You should never build your business on the back of a competitor. What they do is irrelevant. Always trust your gut. My gut has never done me wrong.
Hello and welcome to the meeting room with me, James Lancaster. It's now 5 years since the coronavirus disease, COVID-19, first emerged, sparking unprecedented turmoil and disrupting almost every aspect of our daily lives. For the events sector, the effects of COVID and the related lockdown were catastrophic. Events simply could not take place. Jobs disappeared, businesses went under, and people left the sector in their droves. 5 years on, COVID can seem like a fever dream, albeit one whose effects we are still feeling. Today on the meeting room, we're going to talk about how the sector survived COVID, how it has rebuilt, and most importantly, where it's going next. I'm joined by Liz Taylor, CEO of the Taylor Lynn Corporation and an inexorable force within the UK events sector for nearly 30 years. Liz, welcome to the meeting room.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to take you back almost exactly 5 years to March 2020. Boris Johnson calls a press conference in number 10 Downing Street, stands behind his lectern and says the country is going into lockdown. What were your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that my birthday is March the 17th, and I was actually sat in the Ivy with some girlfriends ready for a lunch when this whole thing was sort of simmering, and it was surreal. And I think it was it the 20th of March that he made the announcement? I think it was about 3 days later. I did manage to have the lunch, I have to tell you, because not a lot stops me from having a glass of champagne. But it was surreal because I don't think anybody realised what it meant. You know, what was COVID, what was lockdown? And I know from a personal perspective, I never realised what was coming. However, 1 week later, and the book shut. £3 million worth of business is gone.
Wow.
Finished. It's not happening. And it's like, you know, what do we do? I sort of sat with two hats, James, because what I did find during COVID was that having worked since the age of 18, and I was in retail before I got into this business, it was the first time that I was allowed not to work. I didn't really think about what was going to happen. I sort of had to very quickly think of a strategy. But I didn't have to get up at 7 a.m. I could go on my treadmill, which I do every morning, and I just had time to breathe a little bit. So from that perspective, it enabled me to realign my business, where I wanted to go with it, what I was going to do with it. And then I'm very brand driven. So somebody said to me many years ago when I was in fashion, whatever you do in life, build a brand. And I sat and I watched all these competitors that had pissed me off for all those years, sort of on my back, you know, one who had left me after 11 years set up on her own, and another one who, whatever I did, she was in my footsteps. And so you look at all your competition and you sit back and think what they're doing. They all went into virtual events, a huge investment into screens, equipment, and all that. And I thought, nope, I am actually going to take a punt and invest in my brand, which I'll tell you as we chat, because there were pros and cons to it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did.
That's interesting, because actually what people forget is that at the time there was no clear roadmap. We didn't know how long the first lockdown was going to last, did we?
We knew nothing. You know, nobody knew anything. And obviously there were all recognition events planned. There were gala dinners, you know, there were incentives, corporate incentives. I think that the corporate world was, that was probably hit more than private just finished, you know. Okay, so they weren't going to have a 21st. The high net worth would have a 22nd. That side of the business was always going to come back in some form. But the corporate wasn't guaranteed. And I think from my perspective, that I felt really vulnerable there, because corporate business is 60% of my turnover.
Yeah, so you had £3 million worth of corporate business vanish.
It wasn't all corporate business, but it was £3 million worth of business. I would say probably 75% of that was corporate business. And it was like, you know. And what was also interesting was that people had paid deposits. Now, with my hard hat on, the deposits were not going to get refunded. And I couldn't afford to refund the deposits. Some of them I did, because some people pre-booked, or I knew that my investment in them, it was worth me making that decision. And some people tried to play hardball and probably will never use me again, but that's their loss, not mine, isn't it?
Yeah, but they weren't covered by insurance, presumably.
None of us were.
None of you were.
None of us were. I mean, I tried really hard to sort of get insurance. There were all these policies, but they all had these clauses in. But one thing that happened to me, and I have to tell you this before I tell you about the whole brand thing, was really funny. So one of my staff supported me daily, whether it be on the phone or on Zoom. She actually used to come round to the flat quite a lot. We used to sit together at the kitchen table, but I can't get penalised for that now. But it was the fight for survival, because it was their livelihood as well. And we got this inquiry. We got an email from a company called Urenco, who were a chemical company who I'd never heard of, and it was a pitch. Because a couple of months into COVID, they wanted to do stream online events for their 600 employees. And it was out to tender. And it seemed that we were the only people that responded to the tender. And Jess said to me at the time, she said, we can't. She said, we haven't got it. I said, we have got a clue and we are doing it. And so we tendered. And we put forward a whole load of options. So we were going to do pizza boxes. We were going to do online karaoke. Kath Tilsley, who's a great friend of mine who's into fitness, I phoned up Kath. I said, Kath, I'm going to pay you some money. You're going to do an online fitness session. And we put this whole package together. And
just for our audience, Kath Tilsley's an actress,
Kath
isn't
Tilsley,
she?
so you don't know who Kath Tilsley is?
Is she on Coronation Street?
Well, she was on Coronation Street. She's now in The Good Ship Murder and lots of stuff.
Right, Coronation Street, again, for our listeners who may be in Europe, is the longest running soap opera in the UK, set in Manchester, the cobbled streets of Manchester, and it's an absolute classic.
And I've watched it since I was 4.
Do you
and
still
I remember
watch
it? Yes.
Well, okay.
Yes. Actually, I'm doing Jack Shepherd's wedding in a couple of months.
Jack Shepherd is another actor.
Jack Shepherd is in Coronation Street, and he plays David Platt. And so we won this tender, and they paid me a retainer for 12 months, which together with the support that we got from the government and the furlough, kept us afloat. It just meant that the pot wasn't empty.
Right.
It was a little bit of a safety net.
So this is a contract
was a
for corporate business, online events.
Yeah.
But at that stage, you presumably knew jack about online events, or have you had experience of organising?
I knew nothing, James.
Right.
I absolutely knew nothing. But I was determined that we would get 600 pizza boxes out, and we would, whatever we had to do.
What platform did you use then?
We didn't use a platform. We used people, and we delivered.
Zoom. Was it Zoom?
Oh, it was Zoom.
Zoom.
Yes,
okay.
It was Zoom.
Because everybody was jumping on Zoom, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it was once a month. Once a month, and of course, as these activities, as they got into them, they got more and more employees engaged, and we actually had a lot of fun with it, and we were hugely successful with it. And what it made me realise was that I could do anything. And the girls could do anything, and the morale was there because they saw, they saw that there was something was happening, and it was really good for morale. But for me, investing in the brand was king.
Right. So the 3 lockdowns, weren't there? There's one. 2020.
They all meshed into one.
They all meshed into one.
They just meshed into one. Yeah, you would know.
Events couldn't happen essentially. Yeah. So you were thinking, if I use this kind of downtime in inverted commas to increase my brand and elevate my brand, that would be good for me as we come out of the lockdown. Was that your thinking?
My mission was to have the Taylor Lynn Corporation and Liz Taylor on the tip of everyone's tongue right through that time, which nobody knew how long it was going to be. And the more that I invested in it and looked into what I could do, the more opportunities presented themselves. So, for instance, I have a black book, which you'd die for. And I thought to myself, everyone in that black book is going to be sat at home. So what are they going to do? They'll do a podcast. So I set up events that made me. And it was 4 events that made people turn right or left in life. And I had everybody. I had Howard Donald from Take That. I had Gary Neville. I had or everyone, TV, radio, record producers, everybody, and they were only too delighted to spend an hour talking to me, which now they probably avoid like the plague. But and so I'm now in Series 7, and that was a really good move.
That's another thing people forget, that podcasts became big.
Huge,
during
because
COVID.
everyone wanted to listen to stories and tales and I think it probably launched the podcast industry. I used to listen to Business Wars. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
But it's so brilliant because they are competitive businesses so you've got FedEx and what's the other one? DHL. And then you had Hershey and Mars, and it's how the two, going back hundreds of years, how they built them. And also I learnt a lot. You learn a lot. You learn about strategy. You learn about, the ways businesses are built and run, and, turnovers, vanity, profit, sanity, all those sort of things, because we're all on that treadmill, aren't we, of life, where we rush along and actually don't have time to think. And for me, COVID gave me a lot of time to think.
Yeah. Were you simply not convinced by the arguments that this was the end of face-to-face, people were going to meet online? Because there's a lot of that on LinkedIn, wasn't there? There were a lot of, especially kind of techie guys and people saying, ramping up the tech market, which became massively overvalued as it happens, wasn't it? It was worth billions and now it's worth practically nothing. Were you not convinced by that?
100%. Everything, it's, I hate phones. The one thing that's come out of this is Zoom and Teams. I like to talk to see people when I talk to them. I like to look at the colour of their eyes. I hate phones. My friends will tell you I'm a nightmare with phones. And so for me, it was always face-to-face. It was definitely. But again, it was a risk, James. I didn't know. I didn't have a crystal ball. And every minute we were coming out of COVID for a week. Then you could walk in the park. Then you couldn't walk in the park. Then you were back in COVID. And so it went on. And so then I decided to write a book because my ex-husband, and we had a hugely acrimonious divorce, had always said to me, you should really write a book. You've got so many contacts. I thought, do you know what? I will. And so for anybody listening, it's called Taylor Made. It's available on Spotify and Amazon. If you go to chapter 7, it's all about what he did. And he was not a happy bunny.
There's an audiobook.
Audiobook and hard copy.
Are you narrating?
Yes, you got my dulcet tones. Yes. Yeah, I am.
I should look out for it. The industry sort of more widely during that period of COVID, and we will get beyond COVID, but if you cast your mind back, can you think of businesses that were doing it right and businesses that were doing it wrong during COVID? And, you must have had a kind of good insight into, the way of different agencies and event planners were dealing with COVID. What were your kind of, a lot of people simply gave up, didn't they, and packed in?
Well, I think, look, the small sort of wedding planning companies gave up, but the one thing that I trade on is you should never build your business on the back of a competitor. What they do is irrelevant. Yeah, we're all human and we all sort of like to see, but never ever, always trust your gut. My gut has never done me wrong. So I'm not in a position to comment on how other people plan their way through COVID. All I can say to you, James, is that I believe that my way was the right way because now, 5 years on, I'm stronger than ever.
What about the industries, the meetings industry and the event industry industries? Did they rise to the challenge, do you think, during COVID?
100%, because everybody was fighting the same fight. So, M&IT magazine and Paul, and also what it gave you was time to actually speak to people and cement the relationships. I sort of, slicked my way through COVID, talking to every radio producer, every TV, and I still have those relationships. I was on This Morning the other day. They're hugely important to me because it's all brand. And I think it was quite interesting because I've been in the business for so long and because I've worked with the same team of suppliers for so long. They used to phone me up and say, what do you think? And I say, for f***'s sake, have I got a crystal ball here? I don't know. But there was a trust in that I had worked with them for a long time. I had never made a life-changing decision, quite measured, although I don't appear to be measured. And so I think, in answer to your question, I never followed competitors. I did what I knew was right for me. On the downside, it means that moving the business forward, I have limited options. So nobody's going to buy a business that is built around a person. And whilst I have a really strong team and I've got, plans which we'll discuss in place, that's been the hardest thing for me. And where I am in life, I think I possibly would like to think that I might be sat on a beach in 12 months' time. But I would imagine it would be organising somebody's 50th rather than drinking a tequila.
How has the events industry changed then since COVID? How did it affect the industry as a whole?
When we came out, James, it was manic. And I thought, Jesus, this is brilliant. Everybody was, here's the, do this. We need to incentivise people. We need to, I didn't have a 21st, so I'm going to do it this year. He didn't have a 50th. We postponed our weddings. The wedding industry was very, very challenging. I had one client who'd paid a $25,000 deposit to the Ferragamo villa in Italy, and they didn't get the deposit back. And so people lost money, and it was very challenging. But the first 12 months was very profitable and manic. However, the second 12 months, it started to peter out a little bit, and people were starting to rebuild their own businesses, a little bit uncertain about where, will we have another COVID? Could this happen again? Yeah, it could happen again, but you can't run your life like that. And I think that, if I'm more concerned about the current government and and those implications rather than whether we're going to have another COVID. And now, 5 years on, it's reached a plateau, and next year this coming year is very healthy for us. What's been the hardest is re-establishing the relationships. Everything is out to I won't tender. Not from an ego perspective, although probably there is a little bit of ego in it, but not really. But because it takes hours. You come to me and you say, okay, Liz, I want an event and I've got, 250 corporates, put something together for me. It's out to tender because I have to, for HR or whoever it is, get 3 tenders. That can take me months. It can take me 2 months looking at different venues, putting all the decks together, and then it's intangible. You don't know why mine's different from somebody else's. I know mine's going to be much better. But all they do, the CEOs, is they look at the bottom line and there's 10 grand difference. So they go with the cheap one. They said, you know what, we'll take that tender and we'll just add a little bit of that in.
Right. So you're not interested in that competitive
I'm not interested.
pitching environment.
And that is much more, prevalent
yeah.
Now than it ever has been.
The competitive pitch is more prevalent?
Yes, definitely,
right.
definitely.
So you're pushing back against that?
I am. But then what in contrast to that, I go and cement the relationship. So the Factory International is a brand new venue that's opened up in Manchester. It's fabulous. And I went down and I go for lunch with them and I get to know them and they get to know me. And so when they then get a client coming in, they'll say, well, contact TLC. She's got a great track record. We work with her. She's not the cheapest, but she will deliver the best. And that happened with St Anne's Hospice in October, November with Gary Neville. Gary is a client of mine, but, it could have gone either way. And we got it based on our delivery and reputation. And they raised a lot of money and we got a lot of business from the corporates that attended. So it's all, it's networking, and it's exactly like this, the relationships with magazines, it's relationships with networks, PA networks. I've just been appointed onto the board at Victoria Baths in Manchester, which I don't know if you know, it was the most brilliant building, but it's 10, 15 minutes outside the city centre. So what are we doing? So I'm organising a PA network event there in May, and I'm going to put a red double-decker bus on to shift people in and out. It's only a bit of thought. And so I then have access to probably 200 PAs who by the time they leave will think that Liz Taylor and her team, Laura, Candice, Goldie, all the girls, are the best thing since sliced bread. That's how you build a business. That's how you can, and that is in any industry. The hardest thing about the event industry, as I said earlier, is that it's intangible. You don't know what you're getting till you walk in that room or you go to that venue.
Are you finding events are being used more as a marketing tool now by corporates? They're looking at their events and saying, how can we bring our brand to market via this event, activating their brand?
Well, I think, listen, you're not as old as I am, but years ago, people used to pay fortunes to take an advert in one of the national newspapers, whether it be the Times or the FT or whatever. Now you have to sort of grease the palms of the journalists and try and get yourself a free piece in. But yeah, because you get a much more better, you get a much more value out of an event. And I think people expect an event. They want to, we did a great one for the 50 years of Wayne Homes. That was actually 18 months ago. And it was 400 people. They'd all worked for the company. They'd helped, the Ainscoes build the business. And yeah, so I think that without question, events have replaced other methods of promotion or recognition.
So it's almost the opposite of what people were saying during COVID, isn't it? That in person was, could be on its way out. People will find different ways to communicate. So it's almost as though the experience of COVID actually made people sit up and think, no, we do need to meet face to face.
Nobody was an expert. The government used to come out and make every Friday or whenever it was and give these speeches, which basically were a load of because nobody knew. And I think that it's not rocket science. What would you rather do? Would you rather go in a room, meet somebody face to face, or would you rather sit on a screen where you've got 250 pictures of people that are all engaged on it and you can't reach out to them?
It was exhausting, wasn't it, as well?
It was exhausting, and it also, it's very difficult when you were in those situations, and I did quite a few of those. I did talks, I did motivational talks, and you'd get sort of 60 people on a screen. You can't look at them all. You can't talk to them. I do a lot of talks at the university, and you've got to touch them, whether it's with your eyes or whether it's with your hands or your voice or whatever. And you couldn't do that in COVID.
No. Let's talk a bit about buyer-supplier relations. What's happened to those since COVID? I know in the immediate aftermath, there was this kind of a bit of tension between buyers and suppliers. How is that resolving itself now, 5 years after COVID?
There was this false sense of security with the CBILS loans. So I took out 2 CBILS loans, which I've just paid off. But you forget that you've taken the CBILS loans when you come out of COVID, and you forget that you've got £100,000 there to pay back, which you needed in order to keep the business afloat.
Yeah, so these were government-backed loans.
These were government-backed loans. And so some of the suppliers that I worked with took out the loans and were unable to pay them back, and obviously either went into liquidation and started up again, or were unable to start up again. It was financially driven. It was all financially driven. But I think that for those that... It was a combination, James. It was a combination of furlough, landlords. I know some landlords that... for me, I'll tell you what happened to me, which was the biggest stroke of luck. But some landlords insisted that the rent was paid. Well, you couldn't. They just couldn't pay the rent, so they had nowhere to store stuff. It was a nightmare, but it was every man for himself. And unfortunately, I was one of those men. It was every man for himself. I owned my building, which was on Chester Road in Manchester, and just before probably in the January, the 2 buildings on either side of me came on the market, One was, I think, 220 and one was 225,000. They were 4 floors, Victorian buildings, and mine was really cool. Parking in the back, but it was just outside the city centre. And some angel came along literally in the February, because I'd had both offers of either side refused, and offered me a lot of money for my building because it was all decked out and he wanted to move in it immediately. And this was just before COVID, so I didn't know what was going to happen, and I accepted the offer. And he said that he would exchange immediately, but he wanted a 12-month completion. And during that 12 month, he would pay me rent. So I was out. And it was luck. That was real luck, because I was able to, I bought another property with some of the money, which was always my pension. So I have a small property portfolio of residential. This is my pension. And every time I took a dividend out of the business, I bought a small property. And now I rent in the city centre. Now that does piss me off, because I'm paying rent to a landlord. But at the time, it saved my skin.
Do you think events are better now than they were before?
I think, look, competition is great. Makes you sharpen your pencil. Makes you think out of the box. I love the creativity. I like, we did Wicked before Wicked came onto the stage. And the wall dropped from the stage show. We built the stage set in a marquee. The wall dropped and you went down the Yellow Brick Road. I love all that. I think that people's expectations are greater. I think you've got to offer something in that product that they haven't thought of, wouldn't think of, and there has to be that trust. And I look after a band from Paris. I've looked after them for 27 years. We go all over the world. I've built on my business. I've looked at the opportunities, and I've been very, very strategic in where those opportunities have evolved. I love it. It's in my blood. I go on the treadmill every morning and I think of the most ridiculous ideas, and I bring them to the party. I bring them to the table. But if you look now at corporates, to our detriment as independents, they've all got in-house event teams, and all these in-house event teams think that they can do it better than we can. And so encouraging them to use us as a support is a tough task, because everyone, they're frightened to death they're going to lose their job. And we work with a lot of in-house event teams. I mean, Direct Line are clients of mine, and I've moved with the chairman along his journey. He was at previous companies. I worked with his father prior to that at BGL and Budget Insurance, and it's all those relationships. And so they know that if they phone me up and say, you know what, we want to do X, Y, and Z, they're going to get something a bit bonkers.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think
is that what the events industry needs now, does it?
Yeah,
does it
madness.
need a bit of
it needs madness
and madness?
Absolutely.
And does it also need a sense of why, a stronger sense of purpose? Like, why
I
are we
think
actually
people
having
want,
this?
listen, they want value. They want a return. Their return isn't necessarily monetary. Their return is whatever the message is that they are giving out. They want branding in the most innovative and extraordinary way that no one else will think of. If you're copied, great. I would never forget, we did the opening of the Ivy in Manchester. And Richard Caring, who is totally bonkers but a genius, had this Ivy bus driving around the city, this green, it was made out of ivy. I thought, good God, but now, 5-6 years on, I'm still talking about it. That's what people want. They want madness, they want creativity, they want value, they want security, they want responsibility, and we do all that.
Did we get lazy before the pandemic? Was there a lot of copy and paste, do you think? Not talking about yourself, but the industry in general.
Complacent. Yeah, I don't think lazy is fair, but I think complacent. This is the first conversation I've had about COVID since COVID, because I hate the word.
Yeah.
And I just think the whole thing is negative. So if I go into a meeting or I'm in a situation and they say, if you go back to, and you can't, because if you take the best bits out of it. And listen, a lot of people lost their lives, they lost their livelihoods, and you can't minimise that. But if from a professional perspective and a commercial perspective, you take the best bits out of it, it was something that turned a lot of industries round. I mean, I remember when I set up my consultancy, which I set up in COVID, and it was on literally a flyer, and Gary Neville and Ryan Giggs phoned me up because their hotel had opened 6 months before and was now closed. And Gary said to me, I want you to work with me on activations. And I put it through my consultancy, and the consultancy is going stronger than ever now. I'm working with a fine dining company on a 3-year contract, bringing them to sale, hopefully. But the hospitality industry was desperate, so they were hanging on to any thread, and we used to sit down once a month with the Stock Exchange Hotel and work out how we could put plans together to encourage people after COVID to come in for a drink after work, for whatever incentive we could give them. And it was challenging for me. I loved it because I was looking at the future. And I was looking at the future through a different pair of eyes, through a new business that I would not have started had COVID not happened.
Yeah. What about talent in the industry? A lot of it obviously left during the pandemic, but are we in a good place now in terms of talent recruitment, in terms of young people coming through into the industry? Is it a sexy industry to be involved in?
It's the hardest industry. If you saw how many students I talked to at Manchester Met who are all desperate to get into event management, and the one piece of advice, or the people that I have taken that have been the most successful, have been the ones who during their university years or after school have gone and worked in bars and restaurants, because communication is the key. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to organise an event, but you do have to be a brain surgeon to get the right people around you. So I've got people that communicate brilliantly. I've got people that only focus on admin. You know, you play on their strengths. I had this conversation with my daughter this morning who drove me in here. Well, she drove me halfway and then got fed up. But she, and her communication skills and people skills are second to none. But her admin skills leave a lot to be desired. But she works with Candice in my team, whose admin skills are phenomenal. So you play on the strengths. And yeah, it's an amazing industry. And people, you know, they read my book, or they see that I've worked with Gary Neville, Gary Barlow, or I've worked with this celeb, or I did, you know, we got a call from Kensington Palace some years back, and the client was Prince William. It's all in the book. It's quite a funny story. But that's that's reputation, you know, and you don't always get to do that. It's a hard industry to earn money.
Is Gen, whatever it is, Z, are they up for it?
I thought Gen Z was a DJ, actually.
Yeah,
I didn't.
isn't that?
Do you know what Gen Z is? I don't know what Gen Z is.
Are the younger generation up for the challenge? Are they as hardworking as they ever were?
Yeah, you know what I find the hardest is all this social media. I've got, you know, I am still a pad and pen girl. I have a desk diary, and I like everything written in it. And now I'm challenging. I left my mobile phone on Stockport Station last week, and it was like I'd lost my right arm. I thought, this is ridiculous. You know, Instagram, TikTok, social media, and I now have a whole team of 5 that I have to pay to do that because it's not my bag, it's not my thing. My team are brilliant with it, and they'll say to me, no, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. So it's, I think, for technical whiz people, it's a fantastic industry to be in. And I think the agencies, but would I start now? Would I recommend? No, because, you know, you buy a chair in for £1.75. I buy a chair for £1.75, and I might negotiate it at £1.25. So because I'm using that supplier the whole time, I'm earning 50p a chair. Can you imagine how many chairs I've got to sell in order to rent an office, keep staff? National insurance has now gone up. Run the business. I've just had a VAT. I've had to pay all my VAT. It is so hard. You know, if I was recommending it to anyone, go and work for a company. Please don't apply for a job for me because I haven't got any. Or go and work for a hotel group. But setting up on your own now is nigh impossible.
So you advise someone to go in-house?
Definitely. And then phone me to get the support so they can get the creativity, so they can get that little bit of TLC.
Interesting. So what's next? How do you see 2025 playing out? Is it going to be a good year for events?
Well, it's a good year for me.
Good year for you.
Yeah, I've got some really crackers. I've got 4 days in. I'm doing a wedding in Barbados in August, which is really exciting for a very funky, wacky private client. And we've got, I've got another private event. I'm doing a 15-year anniversary for a property development company who's also a bit mad. He's mad, thank goodness. So we've got, and yeah, I've got lots going on. And
what about the corporate event sector? Is that
corporate? Is the privately owned corporates that are investing. The PLCs are. Are not as are probably frightened. I think they're spending other people's money.
Yeah,
but a privately owned company, and they're the ones that I nurture and go after.
So you're an optimist in general.
My glass has always been half full.
Yeah.
Always. We all have imposter syndrome. Everybody has it, and we all have what are now mental health issues, which might have pre-COVID being a bit of a Debbie Downer, but now we've got mental health issues, we've got mental health awareness week, we've got menopause issues, we've got all this. That's all evolved out of COVID. And it's probably brought the challenges to the fore. But if I don't go in with my cup half full in the day, then how can I expect my team and my, and we do 1 day a week, we do a Wagamama lunch, that's a good plug for Wagamama, and my boardroom table is a baby grand piano which I bought for one of my big birthdays and painted it red, and I had a violinist on it. Anyway, that's my boardroom table, and we sit round it and we talk about all the rubbish that we talk about, and all that is part and parcel of developing and growing a business. The vibe is good. People want they want that, they want it rubbed off on them.
Is the events industry definitely a sort of in-office industry, do you think? Can people do it working from home? Do you encourage your staff to be in the office?
No, 100%. And I know somebody else who he is actually a billionaire. He has a money lending business, and we had this conversation, and my team said to me, well, can we do 1 day a week? I'm not interested. And they have to come in with makeup on every day, and they have
even the men.
And they're not the men come in looking better than women, and they are not allowed to wear blue jeans. And I'll tell you why. I don't know if I've got time to tell you this, but many years ago, I was in a previous office, and the Lowry Hotel phoned me, and they said that they had a client who'd come in and wanted to organise a Christmas party and needed help. Could they send her round to my office to see me? And I looked a mess. It was like the office at the time had a floristry business downstairs, so there was about 15 of us, and we all looked like we'd been dragged through thorns backwards. And this client that came was a director of LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, and she managed all the watch brands from Tag Heuer to everything. She was a big cheese. And from that day on, I swore that I would go in every day, made up, suited and booted. And it's proved me right, because I can get a call at 11 o'clock in the morning, and you've got to read the book, James, because there's a great story in there about how I got Gary Barlow as a client. But you have to go in assuming that Prince William, King Charles or whoever is going to walk in the office that day and want you for a party. And it's self-esteem,
Okay.
Do you think I look all right today?
You look fabulous today.
Thank you.
And listen, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming into the meeting room. And I know you write for M&IT, so I look forward to your next column.
Thank you so much, James. Thanks very much. I've loved it. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.